Hello, everybody. Welcome. Jenna and I are really excited for this event. We thank you for coming. We believe that this opportunity or this event shows you great potential to participate in research within the School of Architecture, and we want to make everyone as aware of all of the opportunities they have as possible. So two quick notes of people you can reach out to within the school is Caroline Maloney, who is the Academic Advising and Research Program Director, and Professor Krupali Cruce, who is the Associate Dean for Research and Scholarship and Creative Work. So those are two kind of pinpoint people within the school that you can always reach out to. You can always ask Jenna and myself questions you have too, but this event will also inform you a whole lot.
Okay, so to start off, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Veenstra. Kaity graduated with a Bachelor of Architecture degree at the University of Notre Dame in 2013. During her time on campus, she participated in Greenscale Research Project with Professor Amy Buccellato and was an active leader of multiple student groups, including the Student Association for Women in Architecture. She was awarded one of the 40 fellowships to the Gates Cambridge program at the University of Cambridge, completing her Master in Philosophy in Architecture and Urban Studies in 2014. She currently works as an architect for Ryan Companies in their Chicago office, where she's a part of the team transforming over 13 acres at the suburb's busiest transit-oriented development. Her research career has continued at Ryan, where she worked on a case study for net zero commercial high-rise development and a proposal to executive leadership proposing innovative growth strategies for future company expansion. She was recently recognized by ConstructTech magazine as a recipient of the 2019 Women in Construction Award. And with that, I'd like to welcome Caitlin.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I don't know if IT can hear me. Are we good? I hope so. Okay, thanks to Jenna and Steph and to Krupali for inviting me here. I'm really excited to be back on campus after 6 years. Different seats for sure, because I was in Bond Hall and this is all new to me and it's wonderful. The other big difference I think for me is the research presence and this positivity, having a forum and showing this much interest. And I'm so glad that all of you are here to kind of learn a little bit more about what it's like to do research, whether it's part of your undergraduate experience or as a postgraduate pursuit. For me, I didn't come into Notre Dame thinking I wanted to be an architect. I was actually a biology major and I transferred. And I also didn't come into things thinking that I was going to do research and I was going to go to grad school. So my journey, hopefully it can be somewhat helpful to you guys in understanding that you don't have to have it all planned. Things can change and you can find your path into research a little bit more organically. So in my case, I was going through architecture school during the recession. So when I started my freshman studio, everyone said, just drop now. You're not going to find a job, things are really bad. It's not going to be great when you get out, so switch to engineering, switch to computer science, something that's more predictable. Well, a lot of us stuck with it. We actually had a pretty high graduation rate from our class, despite all the scare warnings. And for me, what that meant is just a challenge in my summer job. So research came into my path because Professor Buccellato started her Greenscale project when I was in Rome, and finding an internship without any family connections to a firm from an international office when there wasn't a whole lot going on, I said, how can I stay involved in architecture when there's no internships for me? And that's how I found research. It was my transition to something relevant, something to keep my resume building going on when there was nothing else, and it actually became a really valuable experience that I appreciated in more ways than one. And through that, I found my path to the Gates Fellowship application. CUSE was an amazing help in filling that out and going through the process. And then obviously I am where I am today. So I want to talk you through my story, but not just by telling you my story. I want to show you kind of my thought process and some of the thoughts that I had when I first questioned my decision to begin research and to apply for this fellowship. Where do I? Aha. So when you think about research, we're not just talking about looking things up in books to inform your projects. We're talking about something more holistic. And the relationship that research has with the architecture profession is really what I want you guys to take away from this. It doesn't have to be professional architect or research academic. Research actually is a component that really can build upon and inform your professional career and even inform your studio work right now, whether it's during class time or it's on the side during a semester break. So I want to go through this by talking through 9 of the misconceptions or the negative thoughts that I had regarding research and why I think they're actually very different than your first impressions. So the first one is, it's hard to apply for grants and fellowships. It's pretty true. It's difficult, but I want us to all have an honest moment here. Who applied and got into the University of Notre Dame? Raise your hand. Raise your other hand. Who is succeeding at architecture school right now? So everybody here. Those are both some pretty hard things. The National Survey for Student Engagement just ranked architecture as the toughest major across college programs. So if you guys are surviving even, you're doing a pretty difficult thing. And that proves to all of us that hard things don't scare us. We're not afraid of trying something difficult. It's a little bit of extra work, but the reward can be really worth it. And when you think about the resources that you're about to hear from next, they're all here for you on campus. The same way that the Career Center helps you find a job, all of these resources are here to help you find that grant money. Think of that idea and really workshop it to make it be what you want to do for research. So you're not alone in this void to try and figure out what research means to you. The second one is that you have to have a great idea. You've got to have it all figured out, know all the details, have it all solved, and that's how you have to apply for a grant. I'm here to question that and say, all you need is a question. The whole purpose of research is for you to explore something and to understand what interests you in a deeper way. So do you have to know the answer? Absolutely not. Can you figure it out through your research? Absolutely yes. So if you think of something that you really want to learn more about, that is all you need to begin a grant proposal. And it's honestly all you need to begin an application to a graduate school as well. For me, it was figuring out, for all that I learned about building here, I wanted to know more about sustainable building. And I know about the modern world of it, but how is there a relationship between traditional methods and sustainable building, and more that I had just understood in my limited 5-year degree here? So that's what I used as a filter to focus what kinds of programs I applied to, what kinds of research I looked into, and that helped me develop the idea that I had later on to pursue the Gates Fellowship. The next one, if you finally decide to fill out that application, realize it's not so hard. There's a common perception that the odds are not in your favor. I'll give you that this one is probably true. Statistics are pretty tough when it comes to getting into colleges, even like Notre Dame. They're pretty tough with some of the grant applications. As Steph and Jenna mentioned, 40 students are selected from the US every year for the Gates Fellowship. More than 700 apply. And for the international pool, they get 50 spots, but more than 2,000 apply, so their odds are even tougher. Does that mean you shouldn't do it? I would say absolutely not again. Because if you let the odds scare you, most of us wouldn't be in this room. We might be at easier colleges, but we wouldn't be getting the resources and benefits that we get from Notre Dame. So sometimes things that are difficult and scary are actually worth the extra effort in the end. The other piece I want to talk to you about when it comes to the odds not being in your favor is thinking about your own work more than somebody else's. So when I flew out to Washington, D.C. for my interview for the fellowship, the pool was already pared down to about 100 people, so a lot less. And I met my roommate, who was another applicant that evening. She had come from Harvard, so at first I'm like, oh shoot, someone from the Ivies. Been tough competition. And then she told me about her proposal. So she wanted to go for a master in gender studies so that she could study the colonial ties between Great Britain and India and advocate for the rights of sex workers to get the international aid that they had been denied by federal funding because of colonial issues with prostitution. I'm like, well, shoot. I want to have this kind of humanitarian angle to mine. My proposal is not as well thought out because I haven't been researching for my entire undergraduate career, so gosh, I don't know if I stand a chance. She's so qualified. The only saving grace that I had is that my interview had been that morning. And after I talked to her, I felt, not very confident in my own proposal, but luckily I had interviewed before that. And a month later, I found out we both got the scholarship. So it doesn't necessarily matter who you're up against or what their idea is. What matters in research is really what you want to do. What makes you unique, what makes you special, what makes your proposal special. And if you have that confidence, that's what you convey to them. So in the case of Cambridge and the Gates application, what is it about Cambridge? What do you want to study there? What's the program? And what's your story as far as why that program at this time is the right spot for you? And if you convince that board that that's the right choice, it doesn't matter to you what anybody else applies for. You are fighting for your spot, and they choose if you deserve that spot. So don't let the fear of somebody else and their qualifications impact whether or not you think that you should apply or whether or not you think you're qualified for it. So like I said, I got lucky. If I had interviewed the next day, I don't know if my interview would have gone the same way because I had a lot more questions in my mind, but in reality, we were both very qualified. The next one is there's not enough time for research and studio. The beauty of this is you don't necessarily have to do them both at the same time. Sure, the application has to happen, during the school year. You're not going to escape that one. But a lot of the research grants out there give you the option of summer or winter break, so you can choose the time for the research that works around your schedule. And actually, a lot of the fifth years have been using it for their thesis proposals, so you can use that research as a tool to help your studio. You don't have to feel like you're overwhelming yourself, because my guess is if it was tough 6 years ago, your studios probably haven't gotten any easier, and I understand that. But think of research as a tool to complement and help you with the legwork of your project research during this semester. And think of it as an option to add to them rather than being one more thing with the clubs and your jobs that compete for your time. It's also kind of nice to take a break sometimes and think about something besides the project that you spend 72 hours straight looking at. So for me, going back to my application was actually a refreshing moment to process my path and the direction that I wanted to take outside of just the work to finish the end of the semester. You know, when you start thinking at the end of your fourth year about what might come next, career fair is obviously an option. Your internship for the summer still comes up, but it's nice to think about how the work you're doing might have a greater context after graduation and use that to then help shape what you do for your thesis or what you spend your summer doing. And it's a good break to really pull you back out to a higher level of thinking than just your project work. Now, as I talk about graduate school more than undergraduate research, some of you in this room might have the exact same thought that I had, which is, no way, I'm not doing more school. Been in 9 years of elementary school, 4 years of high school. I've already been here a year more than I signed up for, so I'm done. No more exams, no more term papers, certainly no more all-nighters. This is just enough for me. I had the same thought, and I thought, you know what, if I do go for this, I'll still look for jobs. I'll probably get the job and not the scholarship, so I'll hedge my bets, and this will be my plan B. And it's going to be okay. I don't really need to go to school anyways. It's not going to buy me much. And I will tell you, the more I researched the programs to fill out my CUSE application, the more I started to see it as an opportunity that I couldn't necessarily come to later. I would find these programs that actually really interested me. So it was school, but it was actually school that I wanted to go to in a different way than just another year of what I'd already been experiencing. Because graduate school is different. If you go to a Master's of Architecture, it's not drastically different. It's still a studio culture. It's still very similar to the framework that you have here. But there's a lot of other masters out there that you can add to your degree that aren't necessarily architecture that you can think about in a research context. Whether it's a Master's of Business Administration, a Master of Science, or in my case, a Master of Philosophy is what the UK calls a Master of Arts. So my original degree was Environmental Science and turned out to be called Urban Studies by the time I graduated, courtesy of some university changes. But my Master of Philosophy degree was all essays. It was all papers. So I came in with a concept. I proposed my own structure and how I wanted to do my research, whether it was field observation or reading through books or talking to people. I got to set up the structure for my own project, very similar to the way that you guys get to set up your thesis. And that's kind of overwhelming, a little bit overwhelming for sure, but it gives you the option to make your grad school experience most of what you want. And there will always be a couple core classes like a statistics or a comprehensive reading course. There's always a little bit of that background, but it's almost like more of your graduate experience becomes the thesis project that you wanted to work on. So you're not competing for your time with exams and checking these boxes off. You really get the green light to pursue your passion. And that's actually a benefit in this case to have more of that school experience. The next one is that architecture needs a studio culture. So a lot of us have gotten used to the team collaboration and working together, having people to bounce ideas off of, and the thought of having the option to make your own schedule, make your own program, and also do it by yourself, kind of in a void. You have an advisor, but you're not with this group of people. There's nobody else to figure out what they're doing, totally doing your own thing, whether it's undergraduate research or your master's. It's intimidating. I'll be honest, the independence was the hardest adjustment about being in grad school. Because here, your studio professor checks in with you 2-3 times a week. They're always there if you need them. When you're in graduate school, a lot of it might be on your own. You might see your advisor every week, once a month. And so you're responsible for setting your schedule to keep yourself moving, keep your work going, decide when to start reviewing and when to stop writing. So the independence part is definitely an adjustment, and it's a little bit tricky. But I think the biggest benefit to not having a studio culture that surrounds you and supports you is that you find a different studio, if you will, a different outside community. And that provides you with eyes that sometimes you miss out on an architecture school. So in the case of a fellowship, Gates Cambridge provided a community of people from every different walk of life, different disciplines, different countries, different university backgrounds, different stages of completing their degrees. So instead of having a group of architects to bounce my ideas off of, I got quantum physicists, microbiologists, social scientists, and every time that I felt that I was getting bogged down and thinking about the same thing in my work, I was hitting a wall, I was getting stuck, it was really refreshing to go talk to somebody else and learn about what their work was doing, how that might influence architecture, how they're approaching a problem and how they solve it, and what kinds of things they think about in their research. So to me, I think a greater community is actually a big benefit to architecture because sometimes we get caught up in our own minds a lot. And if you think back to our favorite Vitruvius, he was a bit of a master builder. He looked at chemistry for building materials. He studied mathematics. He studied physics. He didn't just think about architecture, and he obviously consulted with people in every walk of life as he wrote his treatises. So the master builder, the interdisciplinary nature of architecture is really in our bones and sometimes gets overwhelming with studio culture, but doing a fellowship program or even doing research at the university exposes you to a broader realm of topics that helps expand your knowledge base. This is one of my favorites. If there's any grad students in the room, hopefully this isn't too touchy of a subject, but I'll go to graduate school later. Yes, yes you can. Why I am going to advocate for going to it now is purely because of the resources that you had. So everybody up here, your professors, the fact that you're on campus, you're working on projects and you have the time to devote to applications is a huge, huge help. You can always go to graduate school later, but particularly when you're looking at fellowships, it is going to be a lot easier to take the time now. When you're working, it's always like, well, I'll get to it next year. I want to finish out this project. Got to work late this night, and there's always going to be something that spirals. You've got a nice set schedule in the school year that correlates well with a set schedule for applications for grad school. So those deadlines are built into your life. When you're in the working world, summer happens and winter happens, and there's not really an easy flow of these breaks where you have more time to work on things. So there's a benefit to applying now for that reason. And there's also a benefit to the path in life that you're going to take. So in the moment that you're in right now, most of you probably don't necessarily have strong attachments. You don't have pets. You're not tied to your family. You're not tied to financial needs. When you apply to grad school later in life, you may have more restrictions that create obstacles to your choices. Not necessarily a bad thing, but when you think about some of these international fellowship programs, you might get the most out of them if you have the least restrictions in what you're willing to do afterwards or where you're willing to go for those programs. So a group of friends that went through the Gates Cambridge program with me came in as physicists and microbiologists and a couple math majors, and at the end of things they were going to go for PhDs. They already had programs on lock and they were going to finish the masters and go straight back to the US for those programs. And instead, as they met each other and worked together, they ended up, some of them going back, and other than them dropping the PhD program so they could do a startup. So they found new opportunities just by the nature of letting their research and the people that they met take them in a new direction with what they cared about. So going to graduate school later doesn't prevent that. It doesn't make the application that much more difficult, but right now you're in a state of ultimate flexibility where you can let that path evolve a little bit more freely than later in life when you might have a lot more going on that you need to think about. If you think about the game of life again, there's no bad choice per se. You can win the game with either option, but there's different conditions that come with the different paths you choose. So when you think about what you might want to research, whether you need to have the professional experience to understand that topic better, or whether you want to dive right into it now while you're young, each path has its own benefits. So it really comes down to which path you think works best for what you're looking for. The next one is that going to graduate school will delay getting your professional license. Raise your hand if you're excited about AREs. Hesitant? It's okay, you could be, but I was not. I obviously went to 1 year of a master's program. So I came out of Notre Dame, interned for 4 months, and then did not earn any internship hours, didn't start taking tests for the next 15 months. Did that set me back in getting my license? Technically, yes. Did that set me back in my career? Definitely not. There are still classmates of mine who worked right out of college who still don't have a license. There are classmates who got theirs earlier. There are actually people at my firm with more years of experience than I have who still don't have their license. And they're highly respected, they're very experienced, they lead projects, but I work for a big firm. So some of that licensure relationship to your work relates a lot to what kind of firm and what kind of job you see yourself having. If you want to run your own firm or work for a small firm, that license is very important. If you're going to end up working for a bigger firm like mine, whether or not I sign drawings isn't highly critical. So having a license is important, but there's not a set time frame in which you have to achieve it. And in some ways, taking that time to understand things better doesn't hold you back at all. So if you're worried about your license, take a breath. It's not a race. You don't have to finish before everybody else to be able to achieve that goal of being a professional architect. And the last one here I think is my personal favorite, just in the sense that this is the feeling that I got overwhelmingly when I applied, is that I need to have work experience. I'm not going to make any more money. It's not valuable. Having a master's doesn't add to my ability to get a job. Because again, I was coming out of the recession, so jobs were a little bit more scarce than they are now, and that was so critical. How do I make myself marketable? Is this really going to add to my value? I will tell you, it doesn't necessarily add to your salary in as meaningful a way as other professional career tracks, but it adds a ton to your marketability. So your ability to do research, whether it's an undergrad or again in a fellowship program, is something that makes you unique. And it's something that develops your professional skills. And whether or not you were aware of it, a lot of firms actually have their own research components. Perkins & Will, SOM, Gensler, Perkins Eastman, a lot of those large firms actually have a team devoted to research. And it's a value to the firm both for their own understanding, but then their marketability and networking to clients. So if you as a firm that designs hospitals can say, we're on the cutting edge of understanding the innovative trends in healthcare, and human movement, and wellness in buildings, that makes you the top expert at your firm. So architects need to do research just to stay as the best architects they can be. So that's a skill to a firm in and of itself. It also helps that firm become participants in national AIA conferences, other networking organizations. Those presentations at a national AIA conference come from somewhere, and they come from architects. So you don't have to be an academic to use that research skill in your career. It'll happen as a professional architect as well. In my experience, we work for a real estate company, so a lot of our projects are corporate office buildings for developers, multifamily. Sometimes we get a little stuck in a rut of repeating something we know well. We know the pro forma works, we know the structure is easy, we know the costs come out. So we had been doing a lot of the same thing for a while. So 3 of us at the company said, what if we could do something different? And why don't we? We've got a little bit of space in our schedules right now. Let's make a research proposal. So we went to our executive team and said, we want to study not just how to do a commercial office building in a northern climate, but how to make a net zero commercial office building. This is unheard of. They said it's never going to work. We got the money, and we showed them that it doesn't necessarily work, but we were able to prove out a lot more than they expected when it came to how green you could make that office building. We took the time to help them improve their processes while being at a practicing architecture company. And then we took that product that we produced all the way from understanding exterior skin through understanding the financial value and the pro forma of that project, and we circuited the state. We went to different conferences, we talked to medical centers. We used that research both to inform our own practice of the company and also to inform other clients about our company, to say, look at what we're doing. We care about improving your product. We care about thinking about these things on your behalf. So we're not just researching in a vacuum. That research occurs and moves our profession forward. From a professional experience standpoint, that independence, that innovation, that's very valuable. Back to the nuts and bolts of things, the process of having to apply in and of itself is also very valuable. The months that you'll spend preparing an application, it's much more in depth to apply to grad school than it is even to apply to college. But that's a good thing. You end up having to think about yourself, speak about yourself, practice these things over and over, and if you go to a job interview, that preparation is pretty much the same thing you'll want to have done for that. You want to have good questions for the interviewer. You want to anticipate their questions. You want to think about your philosophy in architecture, and you want to be able to present yourself well. So preparing for a fellowship application or preparing for research is equally as valuable as preparing for a job interview. Same thing with public speaking, being able to make a presentation. All of these skills tie together so well that doing research can prove to an employer not only do you have a passion that stands out above the crowd, everybody's got software skills, everybody knows how to do some good design process, everyone comes with a good pedigree from their colleges these days, there's a lot of applicants. You have something different. You have a story, and then you can also tell that story. So think of research as a complement that a lot of people may not have to their resumes that make you, even if you're 1 year behind, a much more valuable applicant and much more hireable. So to round this out again, these are my perceptions. These are a lot of thoughts that I had when I was thinking through the decision both to do research as an undergrad, but also to go for a fellowship and wait a year on my career. And I had a lot of these misgivings, so they may not all apply to you, but this is the decision process that I came to go through Gates. For me, it was a very valuable experience. A lot of what I've just talked about came about because of Gates. I could still be working for Ryan companies, probably wouldn't be standing in front of you today, and I also may not have done some of those research studies and had the experiences that I've had if I hadn't gone for that fellowship. So it's not to say you can't have a successful career without research, and I'm not trying to convince you all to go out for an Nanovic grant today. My hope with this was only to show you how research is not just a path to academia. People do that. They go in for a master's, they do a PhD, they go out and teach. That is definitely a path. Skipping research, also a path. But there is a way that you can work it into your professional career and use it to your advantage and marry the two together to complement your experience. And for those of you who are thinking about a fellowship, again, I would encourage you to dive in. Look for those programs, find the one that excites you, and then use that to build your story. And whether or not you get that fellowship, that story can tie to the decisions you then make in your career and really put you in a place where you're excited about your job, even if it's not the fellowship that you had hoped about. So thank you all for humoring me here today. I hope that the panel provides a little bit more information about the resources you've got here to encourage you to apply, and I'll take some questions.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions.
Quickly, I wanted to know, I'm sorry I missed the first part of your talk. So can you explain us what the actual proposal was and how did you go about with the process of finding out that this is the right direction and this is the right scholarship for you to apply to?
Sure. So because of the green scale research with Amy, that is how I found out about the fellowship's existence. I didn't know they existed. I'd heard of the Rhodes before, but my knowledge of that was more for liberal arts, and Oxford doesn't necessarily have architecture, so I didn't even think of that. So because of my research with Amy, she introduced and said, you should think about this. You should consider applying. I think you'd be really qualified. So I worked with her on a research proposal that started with the low carbon footprint work of green scale and evolved it into something that I thought could apply on a more global scale per the Gates-Cambridge brief. I also applied for the Marshall to the University of Kent, and I forget the second one at this point. The Marshall didn't obviously pan out, but with Cambridge, I researched their faculty as well and said who there might be qualified to make sure that I'm not just throwing out my idea in space when there's no architecture faculty there to advise me. And they actually have one of the top environmental design professionals in architecture as the dean of their school, who I was lucky enough to then have as an advisor. So understanding the specialties of the school that you want to apply to is very important in tailoring what you want to study to the university you want to go to. And in my case, like I said, the degree changed once I was there. I applied for a master's in environmental design and architecture, which was a 2-year studio course with a research placement in the field. So my proposal initially was to study how traditional building techniques in an area of the world yet to be chosen could apply to helping indigenous people build their own affordable housing and make it a more low energy, passive, and comfortable space than modern methods in importing materials. When I got the contact for the interview, I did the interview, and then they told me about 2 weeks later, oh, we've changed the name and the length of the program. So I went from a 2-year program with a field placement to a 1-year program in urban studies with no field placement. So I took what I really cared about that proposal, which was the sustainability and the traditional materials portion of it, and evolved it to something I could do within the context of what I already had. So my degree became architecture and urban studies, environmental still being included, and my not ability to relocate, I focused on Cambridge and said, what's happening to this city right now that's unsustainable? And one of the biggest problems that they continue to have is it's a great innovation hub, the campus is expanding, and they have a very tight historic core, which used to host all kinds of small departments that no longer fit in those. So they're taking away agricultural land and they're sprawling out into these green fields to build big, shiny new science buildings, new student housing, and then they leave these historic buildings and they don't quite know what to fill them with. And the argument is that this new computer science building can't function in an old load-bearing structure. It's not comfortable, there's not electricity, it gets too hot, all kinds of problems with those historic buildings not being able to adapt to modern times. So I ran energy models on a specific historic building, found the drawings, modeled it, and compared that to both the carbon footprint and the energy footprint and the thermal dynamics of what that same program would need out on a greenfield site to show you can match the comfort levels that you need to with these adaptations, but you can actually have a lower carbon footprint. And the alternate option, if you did still want to move, would be what other kinds of programs could fill that space. Maybe it's a political science department instead of computer science, someone that has lower energy demands, and what that would look like for that building and what evolutions would make it appropriate for them. Did I get all your question? Great.
That was almost exactly what I was going to ask. But I guess also, could you throw out some more names of fellowships and different things you considered, just to help us brainstorm if we're thinking about doing research?
Yeah, so RAMSA actually has a travel scholarship for architects that's not just for students. That's a $10,000 grant. I know that Matt Cook from a few years ago did the Luce Foundation, which is not a graduate program per se, but it's a travel fellowship for research. And that one is catered towards Asia. So it's more applicable to certain areas of the world than it is universities. Obviously, Gates Cambridge is tied to Cambridge, so you pick that university as your choice. The Rhodes is tied to Oxford for the same reason. The Marshall is open to any university in the UK and any 2-year program. So the biggest difference there is you get to pick whatever school you want, but PhDs are usually not fully funded, whereas with Gates and Rhodes they are. Fulbright puts you anywhere in the world that you want to go for a specific length of time. I'll send you a list if I think of others. That's the ones that come to mind right now. My apologies for not having more.
So just in case you want to have a look, our website from the School of Architecture actually has a student link in which you have all the fellowships possible that exist. And then further on, something that you can do is when the CUSE person is going to come here, one of the things they do is help with fellowships. For undergraduate, for graduates, there's a graduate program similar to CUSE that does the same.
Maybe kind of a follow-up question to that is, how often are these location specific? Do you go to Oxford and study South Asia, or are you almost always going to South Asia if you're going to study South Asia?
Oh, certainly. So another classmate of mine I believe she's the business program at Cambridge, she was doing her PhD, so she came from France to go to Cambridge to study African refugee camp economic practices. So what really is most important is the specialty of the advisor you want to work with. And in the case of master's degrees, most often they know what you want to study and they place you with someone, which usually aligns with your research goals. If that person's really full, it may not be exact, but in PhD, it's absolutely critical. Like, you should usually have talked to an advisor beforehand about what you might want to study to get some tentative approval from them on your topic. But knowing that there's someone there who is interested or has a good working knowledge of your field is more important than the physical location of the university itself. Because once you're there, with a lot of programs, especially PhDs, you can find additional funding to then travel from that university to the location that you want to go to. So there's opportunities to leapfrog.
I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to comment on what I thought was really remarkable about your agility, intellectual and psychological. You're in school, you're being trained to go into practice, and then you apply for this scholarship, and you go, and they change the terms on you, and then you still continue, and you keep going. Then you come back and you go into practice, and it just seems that agility is so important to keep in one's frame of mind, and also not to be afraid of committing to something. And I think that was a very important part of your story, and I hope the students, heard that. So,
Yeah. I think
well
that's
done.
an important tie to design as well. It's not something unique to research. It doesn't have to be a quality you have to have. Really, all of you are being trained for that by being in design, because how many times have you had something that you worked on all weekend, it's on your desk on Monday, and you're so proud of it, and your professor comes in and says, what if you changed this? and the whole scheme is different. That happens all the time in design, right? Everything is iterative, everything evolves, and that's just the same thing as the nature of my whole program switching on me. It happens in life, it happens in the professional world, and perfecting the skill to respond well to that, to be resilient to that change, and to really take it and run with it is probably the biggest thing about research that will help you in your careers.
Any final questions?
Was it hard to balance? Was it hard to balance applying for the Gates Cambridge and the Marshall at the same time?
No. So the group that CUSE had founded, which was I think about 10 people when I was here in 2012, they had a group that would prepare together. So even though the essay questions were a little bit different, we would all be working on our drafts and we would sit at tables together and either practice interview or swap our essays, get peer critics. So you knew that they were applying with a somewhat different purpose, but you're all going after generally a research-related graduate proposal. So we worked together across different programs, and you therefore can kind of take the information from one, and it's a little extra effort, but pull it into a second one just as easily as you would 2 different questions in college essays.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we all found that very informative.